Well, it's certainly an interesting time. But about myself, I'm speaking to you today from a little town north of Boston. I was born in Boston,
Hmm.
grew up in one of the mill cities, Lawrence, Massachusetts, and had a great childhood. I thought it was fantastic. You know what you know, right? And so your reality is your reality, and my reality was a really happy one. I was always surrounded by kids.
Hmm.
Was raised by my mother. I never met my dad, and so we lived in multifamily housing for the most part. And so there were always people around to play with. And I really got into baseball and I got into hockey, and I was just always outside and really enjoying myself. And then when I entered first grade, my mother, God love her, sent me to a private school in an adjacent town called Andover, and the landscape just changed every single day. And so really had an opportunity to meet people of means, people without much money,
Hmm.
and just to sort of figure out how to interact with all sorts of different types of people, and really respect the value that everybody has, irrespective of their own personal wealth. So but after that, sorry for going on a little long there, but
No,
I
far
wanted
away.
to be, one of my passions, and I mentioned baseball growing up, was reading the daily newspaper, and
Hmm.
in particular the sports section. And there was a writer, still is a columnist with the Boston Globe by the name of Dan Shaughnessy, who entertained me endlessly and wrote about the things that I was very interested in as a child. So I wanted to be a sports writer for the newspaper, and that was sort of what drove me. I went to college. I ended up going to Syracuse because they had a great journalism school. People like Bob Costa. I won't go down that, but a lot of people that have gone to Syracuse, so they really do the job well. But I was deterred from going in that direction because of the evolution of journalism, and
Hmm.
in particular how things were moving over to digital. And this was back in 1993.
Hmm.
The writing was sort of on the wall. I think what the industry, the newspaper industry, didn't see was that there'd be all these writing opportunities that existed in other media.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I got out of college. I ended up working with a bunch of lawyers for a period of time, and they were government lawyers, and they were great people. They weren't billing their time, and but they were providing a public service, and so I ended up applying to law school. Went to Boston College Law School,
Hmm.
and then practiced for the better part of 10 years. Largely, it was a transactional practice. So a lot of real estate, a lot of land use, a lot of zoning,
Hmm.
public construction, public bidding, a little bit of labor and employment. Worked with great lawyers, great people, but I found it to be rather isolating. But it was a good view into some of what the industry was all about, but from a different perspective. But I was admitted to the bar in Massachusetts in 2002. That same year, I applied for and received my managing broker credential
Hmm.
because I always loved real estate. I had really good friends growing up. Some of my best friends were in the development business. Their parents were, so I got to see a lot of that. And it was always something that was of great interest to me. So in '02, when I received my license, I was doing business for friends and family as it would arise. I wasn't going out really and prospecting or anything like that because I still had my law practice. But it kept me sane, to be honest. And I noticed a few things. I noticed one that agents were pretty happy in relation to lawyers. Uh, and secondly, and I suppose this is the source of part of that happiness, when I was a lawyer at the table and I was figuring out what documents had to go to the recorder and which ones had to go back to the office, and if this one's notarized, this one's not, and I'd look over and the agent had one piece of paper and it was their invoice, and they were making about 5 or 6 times what I was making. So I knew I was in the wrong seat. And so I picked it up a little bit. I wanted to be a bit more concentrated on the brokerage side and real estate. And um, I joined a company, realestate.com, which at the time was a division of Lending Tree. And they had
Hmm.
perfected or really introduced for the first time the combination of warm telephone transfer with online lead gen. And so
Yeah.
I learned about that. I made some great relationships. And one of those relationships indirectly led me to Glenn Sanford. And the next thing I knew, one day in 2000, early 2010, January 2010, I found myself in the first version of EXP World as an avatar. And I was not the most tech adept person on the planet by any stretch. And I actually viewed it and thought, well, I don't know that I'll spend a lot of time in here. But the great thing about EXP, and it's still like this today, even though we're much more mature, obviously, is that everybody involved just sort of rolls up their sleeves and contributes what they know, right? So I started to go to these Friday meetings And at the Friday meetings, we talk about these things. And, Gabe LeBeau, who was with us previously and who we're still in touch with and think the world of, he released website copy and with my background in journalism and the law, it was easy enough for me to open up the document, go in and make some editorial changes. And I could also do some legal work and get us into states as we were trying to launch in various states.
Sure.
And that wasn't, everybody was rolling up their sleeves. I mean, whatever you brought to the table, you were lending that expertise. You weren't really getting paid for it. You were just doing this because you really were excited about and believed in what it was that we were doing. So that's really how it all started at EXP. And I left the law. I moved over here. I invested, I think, $7,000 to open the market in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And from there, I just kept doing what I could to contribute. And, I had some personal successes. I was able to attract or draw in some folks in the industry who've been around for a long time with well-known brand names, who were respected and credible, and they could see it. They could really see what it was that we were doing. And in fact, in one instance, there was a 23-person office that actually was going to shut down their franchise. They had relaunched as an independent. They saw the future of the industry. And they had invested in marketing collateral. And then we started talking, and they saw that EXP was the avenue for it that really was painting a picture of the future that was even more complete than the one that they were painting themselves. So I had success there. And eventually I kept launching us into these new states. And one day Glenn came to me and said, well, why don't we, we didn't have a lot of money as a company. I didn't have a lot of money as an individual. I think one of your questions is going to be, has it changed me? And it's really amazing to think just all that's happened to me in the last 12 years and to my family. But at the time, Glenn said, can I pay you, I think it was $1,500 a month to keep opening up these new states and doing the legal work. And I back then when I invested the $7,000, I received membership units of EXP Realty LLC. It was the only existing entity at the time, Washington State Limited Liability Company. So I said to Glenn when he made the offer, I said, well, you know what, I'll take the $1,500, but why don't we just do it in the form of membership units? And I don't know what came over me that day. It was probably the best decision I ever made. I was on a roll then. I made the decision to join, and for whatever reason, I made that decision that day, and certainly has panned out well. But throughout the course of my 12 years here, I've seen the company go from 25 agents to over 67,000 across the globe today, from 5 states to 18 countries and every state in the U.S. And it's just been tremendous. I mean, to see the staff that we brought in and just to see how complex the organization has become. But at its core, it's still the exact same thing, Chris. I mean, it's people rolling up their sleeves. It's just now there's 67,000 people plus another 1,500 staff that are rolling up their sleeves every day, and they're all fellow owners of the enterprise, and so they're excited to contribute just as I was back then. And so the fundamentals remain the same even as the organization's gotten a little bit more complex. But I've held a couple of different roles over the years, and it's just been blessed to be in this role and to be a part of the whole story.